So here's a little update on my garden in the front yard. A lot of my roses are blooming, so I'm really happy about it. So I'll go over some of the ones that I have that are blooming right now. So this first one here is Eugene de Bornay. It is classified as a China rose. It's usually one of my first to bloom, and it's not a huge grower, although I think now it is past what its listed potential is. I've got a lot of new blooms on it. I don't think that they're really living up to their real color potential right now, but it is a lovely rose. It smells fantastic. Next, I have one of my favorite treasures here that always does well. This is Golden Celebration. It's a David Austin rose. It smells fantastic, very citrusy and lemony. Has beautiful yellow blooms. They do tend to sag a little bit on the branches, but they've got a ton of petals. And it's always covered right at the beginning of the season. Next, I've got a rose. This is Out of the Blue. It's a Tom Caruth hybrid. It's one of the few roses that I have in this garden that I actually purchased grafted. And I purchased it from a nursery that's up in the north on a rootstock that doesn't do particularly well down south on purpose, and then planted it very deep because I wanted it to grow its own roots and abandon the rootstock. One of the pleasures of this whole garden is that I never have suckers. So there's never any Dr. Huey growing in here, and I'm really happy about that because my prior garden, I did have quite a bit of Dr. Huey coming up after a few years. But this one, I love Out of the Blue. It has just gorgeous blooms on it. This one right here, this is a David Austin rose heritage. It's actually the rose that got me into roses. It's got a beautiful old-fashioned bloom, very, very pale pink, and what they describe as a myrrh scent, which I think is kind of exclusive to David Austin roses for the most part. But it is lovely. I did some heavy pruning this year, so this one is smaller than it normally is. It's normally about a foot taller by this time. That's probably hanging right around 3.5 to 4 feet right now. This one right here is Trade Scant. It is another David Austin rose. It's not one currently in production. It has lovely blooms, and they smell fantastic. But this thing just will not grow in a shape that you really want it. It always stays low. Branches have a tendency to want to grow vertical or horizontal instead of growing up, so you really have to prune it to get shape, and you have to be very vigilant about it. But the blooms are a gorgeous color. There's one right there, I think, that really gives you a really pretty full view of what the color palette is on these. And of course, like the theme in this garden, it smells really fantastic. I've got an old hybrid tea here, Blue Girl. It's one of the few old hybrid teas that I have in this garden. It smells fantastic. We had some heavy wind yesterday, so it's looking a little ragged, but I love this rose. It really has gorgeous blooms, and I prefer more of an old-fashioned rose than a really current modern hybrid, although I have a few exceptions, which this next one over here is kind of one of those. This is another Tom Caruth rose, I believe. It's hot cocoa. Of all the roses I have in this garden, it probably has the mildest scent, but it is gorgeous. It has great blooms. If you had a window that you needed to put something deadly in front of, this is a good candidate. I have a couple of those, and I'll be showing them off. But you can see here, the thorns on these are just deadly. The roses are looking really pretty right now, and they're big this year for this particular plant. It received heavy pruning like the others, but it really has taken off. My big beauty over here, which is always covered in roses, is my Souvenir de la Malmaison, and is of course an old bourbon rose. It is not always the shapeliest of plants, although it is one of those that will take over an area if you try it. It doesn't spread by runners, but it does move out of its out of its zone into the other plants if you give it a chance. And it's always covered. This will be covered easily from February to March all the way into December. Is rarely without at least a few roses on it. And during the flushes, it's always got at least 50 to 60. This rose right here is Glamis Castle. It is another Austin rose. It's a white one of the few white ones I have in this garden. It has that classic myrrh scent again, and it blooms really well. Now this one, I think it says it's only supposed to get to be about 3 feet tall, 2.5, 3 feet, but it has actually gotten quite large. It's pruned right now. I think last year it got to about 4.5, almost 5 feet, but it has really looked good this year, and it's starting to come up with the blooms. They are very heavily scented, and they're gorgeous. This is another one, by the way, that has some deadly thorns on it. So if you're looking for roses with deadly thorns, this is one. This rose here, this is Dark Lady. I purchased it as an afterthought because I needed a deep pink rose for this spot. And it's an Austin, it's supposed to have a nice scent, so I thought I'll just go ahead and get it. It is now one of my favorites. It really does have a gorgeous bloom. They get big. It has really highly scented here. The plant itself doesn't get that large. I want to say the tallest this has been is maybe 3 feet, maybe 3.5, but if so, barely. Let's go ahead and come over here. Right here, not yet blooming, is another Austin. What is this one? I can't remember this one, but I'll go ahead and post something that has the name of it. It's a deeply cupped rose, kind of a pale, almost off-white color, a little bit peachy, but barely. This one is Benjamin Britten. This rose here gets quite tall, and it will move into the other roses areas if you give it a chance. It is very susceptible to lightening of the leaves if you have any shortage of iron. This is something that requires constant iron. But the flowers have a really pretty cup formation and a really beautiful fruity scent. So it's quickly grown to be one that I really love. This one right here that's about to put out some blooms. This is Madam Isaac, another bourbon rose. This is another one that just, if I had it in a spot against a wall, it would probably look better and be a little bit better shaped. I don't have it in that location right now, but it still produces some pretty roses, and it will basically stand upright if you give it a little support. Right now, they look to be all just getting ready to open. The scent on this one is amazing. It is probably one of the most highly scented roses that we have, and it is a really pretty one. This right here is another one of my favorites. It's Jacqueline Dupree. It's a semi-double, and you can see that the whole inside of the flower, everything is really bright pink against that white. And it has what is described to me as a classic musk rose scent. It is unlike anything else in the garden, and that is one of its outstanding qualities. In fact, aside from the fact that it looks like a bunch of peonies on your bush, it just has the most unusual and beautiful scent. This one right here, with my one elusive bloom on the side, even though it is very gorgeous, is New Zealand, the other really old hybrid tea I have in this garden. The flowers, it doesn't have as many as some of the shrub roses that I have. They are huge, and they have a beautiful, beautiful scent. And it's a lovely one. This one right here is not quite to the blooming stage. This is a rose that always looks really great when I take blooms to a show. It's William Shakespeare 2000, another Austin rose. It grows very low to the ground. I've never had this rose be more than 2 feet tall, and it tends to spread a bit. The roses are really pretty. They're very flat and have a huge number of petals. Over here, I have one that I actually did have a bloom on it earlier this week. I took it off because I wanted to take it inside and smell it. This is Kazan Leek. I've got a couple blooms getting ready there. It doesn't have a huge number of petals. It's not particularly showy rose, but it has a really pretty scent on it. And it does really well in the Southwest. I was surprised. It's actually gotten quite large in like the year it's been here. Since I buy mine on their own root, they're usually in little tree sleeves. And this one was a twig that was maybe 8 or 10 inches tall when I got it. And so it really has done lovely. Even though it is next to a tree and actually gets some shade during the summer, it does very well there. This one right here is Crepuscule, is a Noisette rose, and it is covered in blooms right now. This one would normally be much taller. It had actually made it all the way across my garden to invade all the way into my Alba semiplena, which you'll see in a couple roses here. But I removed a huge amount of it because it was getting in everywhere. When it's this size though, it's much more manageable because with that huge number of roses on it, it is next to impossible to deadhead this thing. But it is really pretty. It's not particularly thorny. And it's just, just a lovely fall of roses onto the patio. This one right here, which has no blooms on it, is my 4th of July. You'll notice I have this in front of a window. The reason I have this one in front of a window is because the thorns are devastating. Trying to prune this always leaves me with some scars. It does have beautiful semi-double red and white striped flowers with a yellow center. They're really gorgeous. They have a light kind of apple smell on them. But they are really something else when it's in bloom. And it will get quite big. This one I removed probably a 30-gallon trash can worth of foliage off of it this winter just to get it under control. This rose right here, we're moving on to some once blooming roses. This rose started over here. It's William Lobb. It's a moss rose. It travels by runners, and it ended up over here, which is where most of the growth is coming out. And it's actually draped over my Alba semiplena. And you can actually see some of the flowers down here. If you look closely at some of the buds, you can see that it has the moss on it. And the moss always has a really pretty scent. And it's draped over this huge Alba semiplena, of which I've got one. It's kind of windy today, so I apologize. Let me see if I can get one under control here. I usually have a really yellow center and a really pretty scent. It's after 5 o'clock, so they're starting to close up. These roses really close up during the evening so that you can't see the center at all. This one right here, which is the last one in this particular bed, this is one of my seedlings. It's an open pollination of New Year, which is a really hard rose to get. I have one, but I had to purchase it over the internet. It's also grafted, and so it's just a really hard rose to get, and which is a shame because New Year is gorgeous and smells great. But this is an open pollination seedling of it. The roses are a little bit small, but they are very pretty when they're in the bud stage, and they do have a really great scent. And I just call this one Razzer after a friend. So that's it. That is what is growing in the garden today. I hope everybody is having a safe, wonderful spring, and I'll talk to you later.